I love this chapter which speaks to giving and receiving feedback. And I'll tell you, I read it with a very honest, open approach to reading it and recognize
Uh-huh.
myself in some parts of it, whether they were positive or bad or negative. You know, I did recognize myself because I do sit in a position where I have responsibility. So I
Mhm.
think when people who read this chapter today, folks, I want you to don't just read it because you recognize the words. See yourself. Be honest with yourself in either receiving or giving feedback. As a matter of fact, you start the chapter by saying, please know that honest feedback is more valuable than positive feedback. And some people stop to think for a minute, hold on, isn't it better to be positive? What do you say?
Well, it's better to be positive if being positive is being truthful, because we don't do anyone any favors by deceiving them, by giving them the impression that they're doing a better job than they're actually doing. In fact, that's doing them a disservice because it deprives them of the opportunity to improve
Hmm.
their performance if we're covering things up, if we're just saying nice things so that they can feel good about themselves in the short term from maximizing their potential in the medium to long term.
Someone would say, what's the sense of giving feedback? Anyhow, they're here to do a job, get it done. At the end of the month, you're going to be paid anyway. So what's the big deal?
Okay, so let's say that you're not interested in the people, you're only interested in their production and their output. If they're not performing up to standards, then you're not maximizing the output. So it's a win-win situation when we give developmental feedback. And in the chapter, I talk about the different types of feedback.
Hmm.
So developmental feedback gives people information that enables them to take their performance to the next level, to identify gaps or deficiencies, and then work on those so that you can level up.
Indeed. Now, you've broken this chapter down into giving and receiving of feedback. And you ask the questions up front in the chapter. What is the purpose of feedback? When is the right time for feedback? Who should provide feedback? Where should feedback be provided? And how should feedback be structured? And all of those are critical, but you know, you get so busy sometimes, you're not thinking of that at all. So you can have a disastrous outcome if you're not consciously, carefully looking at the feedback, how you actually conduct that feedback process. So in giving feedback, and we talk about the purpose of the feedback, you see it to be developmental.
Yes. So you have an employee, you have a direct report. As a leader, as a supervisor, as a manager, your responsibility is to help them to maximize their potential. It's about getting things done with and through others. And for you to maximize your outputs, you need everybody contributing at their highest possible level. So, again, that's the developmental feedback. You also can give feedback as positive reinforcement.
Hmm.
So, your people are going to be doing some things really well. You need to give them that feedback so that it reinforces what they're currently doing. Because as human beings, if we don't get that information, then there is a likelihood that we can say, well, nobody is giving me any appreciation.
Hmm.
I don't even know if I'm doing what they need me to do. And so we may start to slap off, to taper off. Besides, we feel good when people acknowledge the
Yes.
contributions that we made, when people express gratitude and appreciation. And so that can motivate us to continue or even to step up our game.
And builds our confidence. But time,
Indeed.
time is also a factor of everything in life. The right time is so important. What do you see to be the right time to give feedback?
Feedback should be delivered as close as possible in time to the behavior, the event, the activity. And again, think about the why. If it's
Hmm.
developmental feedback, someone is not performing up to standard, why would you delay that? Because during that delayed period, they will continue to perform at a suboptimal level. Even if it's positive reinforcement feedback, again, proximity is important. Because if you wait too long, the person might not even remember the
Mm.
incident, the activity for which you're providing the feedback. And again, both the developmental and the positive reinforcement feedback is about influencing future behavior. So the longer you delay it, the less impactful it will be because you have missed opportunity in the interim.
I delayed it because the deadline is so close. I need to get it done. And while I may have delegated it to you, the deadline is tomorrow. I'll take it over. So is
And
that also an
yeah,
issue?
and that's okay. That's okay because when you have external pressures, you deal with that. And it's like when we spoke before, and I said, if you have a child that's about to dart out into the traffic,
Hmm.
that's not the time you're going to have a coaching conversation. You're going to take action, then you debrief afterwards. So the same would apply. Meet the deadline, then have a conversation, debrief what happened, and talk about the way forward.
You use the word coaching just now. I think that's such a critical word to recognize when we're talking about giving feedback. It's part of a coaching approach. It's not just, I'll tell you what you did wrong and you better get it right. It's actually developmental in that perspective because it's part of coaching. So I like that. So as soon as possible, after we've seen the deficiency, we address it by offering some feedback, right? Now, what I
Yes.
necessarily, but sometimes it's all in the messenger. The messenger is all well and good, but the messenger is also going to be a critical. Am I the right person to do so? Is that how much of a consideration should that be?
Oh, that's huge. That's one of the questions that I posed, both for giving and receiving feedback. Because sometimes you're just not the right person to bring the message.
Mm,
However, when we're dealing with your direct reports, people for whom you have responsibility, they're in your chain of command, you absolutely are the right person to provide that feedback. It is your responsibility to provide that feedback. And it can be uncomfortable, so you might want to dodge it and you might want to say, okay, I'll wait for somebody else to have the conversation with them. No, that's an abdication of your responsibility as a supervisor or manager.
oh, I like the fact that you emphasize that because oftentimes supervisors would think, but you're the manager. They report. We all report to you. So ultimately, we'd like for you to be the one who gives the feedback. But you're saying, hold on a second, no. Down the structure, the individual reports to you, Madam or Mr. Supervisor. You do the feedback. You then are
Exactly.
offering your manager will provide the feedback to you. So that's the process. And I think oftentimes supervisors get that particular process so wrong. They don't acknowledge that they are also a critical part of management and it's also part of their responsibility to do feedback.
Indeed, and to emphasize that point, a supervisor may observe some suboptimal performance. Rather than speaking to the individual, they may report it up the chain of command.
Yes.
Now, the manager has no direct knowledge, so they're going on reported incident from the supervisor. Imagine now that employee, that direct report, is getting this from two layers removed.
Yes.
Can you imagine how that might feel in terms of the insecurity? So they're talking about me rather
Mm.
than coming to me directly and sharing with me the concerns. So now I have not just one person aware that I'm, not coming up to speed, but I have to worry about the next level up as
Yes.
well. So
Yes.
it really, if someone reports to you directly and you have direct knowledge of, a gap in their performance, it really is best practice for you to be the one to have the conversation so that they don't have to, get insecure and feel, put upon that, oh, they're talking about me. I wonder what
Hmm.
else they had to say. Is my job in jeopardy? So it can
Hmm.
start a whole downward spiral in terms of insecurity and erosion of trust.
Indeed, which we've talked about before. Now, the where, as in real estate, location, 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 is also important when it comes to giving feedback. The last thing any human being wants is to be called out in front of other people. And so, the where is also vital. Where would you recommend to be a more approachable, a more comfortable place to offer feedback?
All right. So again, I do not advocate or encourage anyone to give developmental feedback with an audience. that should be a private conversation because it's a vulnerable time and you don't want to expose or exploit anybody's vulnerability unnecessarily. So, in terms of the where it, um, also have it be someplace where you can seek to minimize the power distance. So, for example, and this is reinforces the bit about coaching because you want the environment to be supportive and not intimidating. So,
Mhm.
if you have one of these huge mahogany desks with a slab of glass on top of it, and you're sitting in a big high chair, and the person is across that desk for you in a little chair, it the whole
Yes,
setting is not
yes,
conducive to growth and development. When I was in corporate, a lot of times I would actually sit at the same side of the desk with persons when I was speaking to them,
yes,
or sit around a round table, so that we sort of level, the power distance a
yes.
bit, so it makes it more comfortable for them. Um, I don't like giving developmental feedback at the person's station
Hmm.
because, again, it can erode the confidence if they weren't expecting to find out that they're
Hmm.
not performing up to scratch. And you don't want the physical space where they work all the time for them to associate that with a conversation that was uncomfortable.
So
So if you have within your environment the ability to go to a neutral space to have the conversation, then of course that would be preferable.
I
But
know,
you have to work within the constraints.
but how is also
Yes.
in giving as equally as it is in receiving the feedback as well. So let's bridge both areas now with this because we're moving into receiving feedback as a manager, we oftentimes think, no, 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 I don't receive feedback from you. I give feedback to you. But no, if you're going to be as effective a manager or supervisor as ever, it's important to hear how others think about you.
Absolutely. Listen, we all have blind spots. There are things about ourselves that we're not aware of because we don't experience it the way that other people do. And how do we move things from our blind spot, from our unknown area to our known area? Feedback is one of the primary ways. So let's start with receiving the feedback. No, as I say in the book, not everybody knows how to give feedback. So the thing is,
Yes.
you're going to receive some feedback that's not well conceptualized, that's not well delivered. So the onus is then on you to be able to ask the right questions to get the feedback that's most helpful to you. One of the first things that people tend to do that's a big no-no is to give feedback on somebody's personality. Or you're
Hmm.
too quiet. I mean, you think I'm going to become unquiet just because you don't like the fact that I'm quiet? We're all different. We have different personalities. Some of us, extroverts, you never have to ask them what they think because
So
you're going to
true.
find out the same time they find out because they think and talk at the same time.
Yes.
Introverts, myself included, we process and then we talk.
Hmm.
So don't expect me to give you my thoughts immediately because I have to process them, think it through, analyze it. Then I'll be so telling me that I'm too quiet or I don't talk enough, I'm not outgoing enough. That is not useful. That's not developmental. And the other thing that I mentioned, for the most part, people in the workplace, their personalities have been formed already, and most
Yes.
people, we like ourselves. So
Yes.
you're telling me something about my personality. It's not going to cause me to run out and change it. If you give me feedback about my behavior, that's a different kettle of fish altogether. And context matters. And so, one of the things that I advocate when giving feedback and when soliciting feedback is to put it in context in terms of what the behavior is, what's the impact of the behavior, and in the organizational setting, if you can relate it to the organization's goals and objectives, that can be extremely helpful so that you understand why it's important for the behavior to change.
Hmm.
So, for example, Pearson, you submitted the weekly report 2 days behind schedule. As a result of that, because I needed time to review it before I passed it on, We were 3 days late. The GM was waiting for the report to make certain decisions about budgetary allocation. So that started an adverse chain of events. So how do we work on this going forward to ensure that we have punctuality,
If I can assess what
right?
you've just done, you talked, you linked it to the goals, the developmental goals. You talked about how it impacts the overall organization. You spoke about my behavior, how timely or untimely it was. And you spoke for sincerity as well. And you solicited my support in finding the solution, which are all great elements of giving feedback.
Right? And I didn't come down on you. I didn't castigate you. I didn't talk about your personality.
Mm-hmm.
And it was solution oriented. How do we move forward to prevent this from happening? And
Wow.
you know, have the whole picture. You can't say you didn't realize the impact it would have for being late, because I placed it in context.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things I was taught pretty early was in giving feedback, you start with, it's almost like you put the sugar on top before you deliver the bad medicine. Would that be an advisable way in doing feedback? So in talking about you, for instance, Joan, I'm not saying you, but I'd say, Joan, I really truly loved that you were able to achieve the target on time. We were able to do this and we were able to do that. And then I'd say, but, and all of the negatives follow. Is that a good structure to follow?
Listen, the use of the word but negates everything that preceded it.
Yes.
So yes, there's one school of thought that said that you have to sandwich it. So
Mm-hmm.
you come with the positive, then you talk about what you really wanted to talk about, and then you end up with another softener.
Yes.
I don't subscribe to that school. And there are people who do, I'm just not one of them. Because when you create that sandwiching, you risk losing
Mm-hmm. The
the
meat.
content that is so important, the developmental content. Because you come with the softener in advance, you sandwich this in the middle, and then you end with something else. They can choose to filter, and
Yes.
it might not even be a conscious, the filtering might not even be a conscious thought, but you risk losing the kernel of what it is you wanted to communicate.
Mm.
So what I advocate, instead of going with the sandwiching approach and risk losing the essence of what you're seeking to communicate, is to use the formula that I've said in terms of you're not attacking the person,
Mm-hmm.
you're not talking about their personality, you're speaking about objectively verifiable data or behavior or actions. You put it in context, you explain the impact that it has, and then you seek to move forward. And you give the
Yes.
support. So how can I support you to improve on your performance in this area?
This is such an interesting chapter. Folks, you got to get this book for real. You really have to take some time in it as well, because some of the hard one wisdom you spoke about at the end of the chapter is intention is as important as technique or content. Be certain your intention is to help or appreciate. You talked about delayed feedback to lose its impact. Be fast, frequent, accurate, specific, and timely. Feedback is not truth, it's another's perception. When you receive unsettling feedback, stay curious, ask questions, get to know more. As a manager, avoid giving feedback to an employee who is not performing, undermines your credibility, and may send a message that mediocrity is acceptable, basically tolerated. And leaders who give and solicit honest and respectful feedback model courage and humility. Such a powerful chapter, such a powerful way to end as well. As always, Joan, thank you.